economist whose thinking drives a lot of Republican actions and behaviour. His name is James Buchanan, and he died in 2013. And a Duke historian from the Duke University, Nancy McLean, found some of his papers and uncovered a lot of his correspondence with Charles Koch. Koch. Oops. Koch. You know, the Koch brothers, who one of them died this year, David Koch. Anyway, they're very influential. They're powerful owners of some mega corporations in America, and they have been very influential and bought a lot of Republican politicians. All right, let's look at their thinking that has influenced a great deal of economic students and Republican politicians. So, I was reading out loud before from this article called Meet the Economist Behind the 1%'s Stealth Takeover of America. And it's important to talk about because, yes, Trump's behavior is disruptive, treasonous, allows Putin to have undue influence on American domestic and international policy. But it's also important to study what has weakened America and what will continue to weaken America without us addressing it. Because Republicans control a great deal of the dialogue in America. They influence it. You may be familiar with a concept known as the Overton window, which is your window for discussion. And if you start a conversation with some positions that are far to the right, then in order to try to compromise or sound reasonable, your centrist points become further over to the right. And there's been such a determined pull by people on the right that the terms of conversations that adults in America have been shifted over to the right. And people's belief systems have shifted over to the right. There's been an abandonment of the understanding that American infrastructure and American prosperity is derived from everybody making a significant contribution to a collective pot of money that then goes to the maintenance, upkeep, and extension of an infrastructure that's supposed to keep America at the forefront of modern economies. That you compete not just as individuals, but as a society with other societies. Instead, you are resting on your laurels and taking too much to heart this particular economist, James Buchanan, and his teaching that that property is supreme, that the chief principal struggle in America should be to protect the property rights of individuals rather than to advance American society as a collective whole. And that fundamental logical flaw or logical change from the logic of previous eras is what has degraded American infrastructure and degraded the amount that wealthy people pay to participate in American life. And the amount of thinking that wealthy Americans do to detach themselves from the reality of their wealth, that it occurred in a context, not in a vacuum, and that the context was a well-developed American infrastructure paid for by a broad tax base in which American wealthy people were previously required to pay high amounts of their income towards supporting, in the understanding that yes, they could still achieve extraordinary benefits from being wealthy, provided they sacrificed some of their wealth to the upkeep of the society that allowed for their creation as billionaires. Okay, so Buchanan understood people as inherently selfish and believed that compassion and altruism and pity and empathy were all romantic, fantastical constructs. All right. So, in 1965, the economist James Buchanan launched a center dedicated to his theories at the University of Virginia, which later relocated to George Mason University. Nancy McLean describes how he trained thinkers to push back against the Brown versus Board of Education decision to desegregate American public schools and to challenge the constitutional perspectives and federal policy that enabled it. She notes, that he took care to use economic and political precepts rather than overtly racial arguments to make his case, which nonetheless gave cover to racists who knew that spelling out their prejudices would alienate the country. So this is where implicit racism becomes a really important factor to be able to look out for. All the while, a ghost hovered in the background, that of John C. Calhoun of South Carolina, 7th Senator and 7th Vice President of the United States. Calhoun was an intellectual and political powerhouse in the South from the 1820s until his death in 1850, expending his formidable energy to defend slavery. Calhoun, called the Marx of the Master Class by historian Richard Hofstadter, saw himself and his fellow Southern oligarchs as victims of the majority. Therefore, as MacLean explains, he sought to create constitutional gadgets to constrict the operations of government. Economists Tyler Cowen and Alexander Tarabok, both of George Mason University, have noticed the two men's affinities, heralding Calhoun a precursor of modern public choice theory, who anticipates Buchanan's thinking. MacLean observes that both focused on how democracy constrains property owners and aimed for ways to restrict the latitude of voters. Latitude meaning freedom. She argues that even unlike the most property-friendly founders, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, Buchanan wanted a private governing elite of corporate power that was wholly released from public accountability. Suppressing voting, changing legislative processes so that a normal majority could no longer prevail, sowing public distrust of government institutions, all of these were tactics towards the goal. Do they sound familiar? They do to me. But the Holy Grail was the Constitution. Alter it and you could increase and secure the power of the wealthy in a way that no politician could ever challenge. And you may be aware that Republican states, Republican governors, and Republican legislators have been pushing for a Constitution Convention, and that they have nearly succeeded in that they nearly have the number of states requisite to sign on to hold a constitutional convention where they can actively promote changes that sound like the balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, which would just preclude governments from being able to borrow money if the government's budget was shrinking. So say the economy was in a small downturn, there was less money going into government coffers because corporations were paying less corporate tax. That instead of borrowing some money and then increasing stimulus spending measures, that the government would legislatively be boxed in and would not be able to borrow money if the economy was contracting, because they wouldn't be able to unbalance the budget by taking on debt needed to stimulate the economy and correct loss of consumer confidence by stimulus spending. This is a real tragedy in the works because I'm from Australia, where our government gave everybody $900 during the global financial crisis to create stimulus spending, knowing that consumer spending is a significant engine of the economy, and that with that boost to consumer confidence, there would be a commensurate boost to business confidence that could be able to protect the bubble of confidence on which the economy depends. They understood that the economy doesn't just depend on solid, substantial things. It depends on a bubble of enthusiasm. And when that enthusiasm and confidence contracts, when that bubble is popped, recession follows. Consumers stop spending, they become fearful, and patterns of spending are reduced, and the economy contracts even further. So it becomes a self-reinforcing, self-perpetuating downward cycle. All right. So MacLean explains that Virginia's white elite and the pro-corporate president of the University of Virginia, Colgate Darden, who had married into the DuPont family, found Buchanan's ideas to be spot on. In nurturing a new intelligentsia to commit to his values, Buchanan stated that he needed a gravy train, and with backers like Charles Koch and conservative foundations like the Schaaf Family Charitable Trust and others hopped aboard. Money, Buchanan knew, can be a persuasive tool in academia. His circle of influence began to widen. Yay! Yay for the widening of a circle of influence. Let me just check, because I can go online, I think, and check to see comments. Actually, maybe I can't check it using this. I might need an actual laptop and not just an iPad. Checking to see if there are any live comments. Thanks for bearing with me. So yes, James Buchanan understood that he needed a gravy train and that money is persuasive in academia. That's interesting. An Australian university, the University of Queensland, is currently contending with scandal because they've accepted money from China to to launch a building on campus called the Confucius Foundation, and the amount of money they accept is actually reasonably small, but the Confucius Foundation has been approved to help devise courses on Chinese foreign policy and domestic policy, so that there are students who can take courses that will teach them that the mass incarceration of Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, where they are tortured, killed, and their children imprisoned in orphanages, is just a good strategic move to prevent terrorism. Here we go. So that there are students who can take. I can see the lag. All right, so there's no chat yet. One person has liked the video. Thank you. I'll add a comment myself. Hello. There we go. Now we can see that I am being responsive to comments. Although if I go back to reading the article, then I won't. Oh well. The Virginia school that Buchanan founded differs from other economic schools in a marked reliance on abstract theory rather than mathematics or empirical evidence. That a Nobel Prize was awarded in 1986 to an economist who so determinedly bucked the academic trends of his day was nothing short of stunning. But then it was the peak of the Reagan era, an administration that several Buchanan students joined. Buchanan's school focused on public choice theory, later adding constitutional economics and the new field of law and economics to its core research and advocacy. The economist saw that his vision would never come to fruition by focusing on who rules. It was much better to focus on the rules themselves, and that required a constitutional revolution. So he understood that mass acceptance of his ideas would lead to a change in the rules, and then it wouldn't matter so much who was president anymore. The rules themselves would protect property, the rights of the uber wealthy at the expense of the society in general. I mean, Trump proves that who rules matters, but we shouldn't get so sidetracked that we neglect to note the pernicious influence of these type of ideas and the thinkers who doggedly push these type of ideas, that wealth is only possessed by people of merit, that people without wealth inherently lack merit and should be denied the opportunity to exercise political power, that democracy should be undermined because that meant people with less money will just take money from wealthier people. It's not actually true. People with less money don't just say, I'm coming after your Maseratis and I'm going to take them for myself. People just want to exist safely, for their families to be safe and secure and have reasonable prospects without having to move too far away from them. People are actually, whilst there are certain aspirational people, in the main, people are very family oriented, and it gives them joy to stay near their family and to support their families. Some people are wealthy and some people aspire to great wealth. And social mobility, the ability to pursue levels of wealth outside of your customary situation and your family situation, that's a nice ability to have, to grant your society the ability to have ladders that enable progression up out of circumstantial stratas of lower middle class, or just people with less money and people with lots more money and people with buckets of additional money. We need to recognize tendencies in human nature. There's a tendency to acquire wealth and to focus on wealth and the pursuit of wealth as an all-consuming goal. There's also the tendency of humans to pursue family stability and family safety as an important and central goal. And when that goal of family security and family safety becomes so disrupted that people can't feed their families anymore, that's when you habitually have mass social unrest and mass uprisings. When people say, hey, wealthy, you are protecting yourselves and your pursuit of wealth and sparkly things at too great an expense, at too great a cost to us. We can't eat, we can't live. So James Buchanan had hypervigilance to protect the wealthy. And many elite in the intelligentsia now have hypervigilance to protect America from communism or socialism. And that overreactivity to the idea of socialism means Americans ignore the way that democratic socialist countries function, which tends to be better. They have higher longevity scores, higher happiness scores, and lower costs of medical coverage scores than America. And Americans don't know because they are too inculcated in the idea of American exceptionalism, so they don't even think to look at how other countries are doing. It's important to maintain a degree of intellectual humility so that you notice factors such as American life expectancy tapering off, whereas other countries, even non-religious countries, because America is more religious than Europe, but Europe has higher life expectancy. So does Australia. Australia has higher life expectancy, and we're just as obese in general as American citizens. But yet we pay less and gain more from our healthcare, and our life expectancy is higher. We haven't been taught by economists such as James Buchanan to abandon social cohesion and to abandon empathy and compassion as an important common value. So that's what I'm going to leave people with today. I hope it hasn't been too long, 17-minute chat. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, please feel free to like the channel. I'm just going to check and see if there were any comments. Somebody said, just finished watching the debate this evening. Oh, so it's only just finished now. Wow, that was a long debate. I guess there were a lot of Dems participating. Tulsi Gabbard defended herself against accusations that she's a Russian asset, which isn't true. She is very evidently a Russian asset and an Assad apologist. But hey, does it take all sorts? Not really. She shouldn't be on the debate stage. Maybe her presence there is an opportunity for Americans to talk about how Putin doesn't just infiltrate the right. To a degree, he infiltrates the far left as well. And that's why you'll have people on the far left denying that Russians influenced the 2016 election. Putin did. There was a military budget over $1 million a month. They're still openly doing it now. They have outlets, office centers where hundreds of military personnel are employed in generating profiles and using their English language skills to come online and try and divide Americans, bolster conflict, and just try and coalesce public opinion around certain positions, supporting Putin and supporting his puppet in the White House. All right, I better go have something to drink before I lose my voice. Thank you for listening, and all the best to everyone going forwards in the days and weeks to come with the impeachment inquiry, which is certainly valid, legitimate, and various women have been standing up to the Trump administration and the White House, Trump's White House, saying that they are not allowed to testify. So Fiona Hill defied the White House's command to not testify on certain subjects. She issued a statement through her lawyers to say that if crimes have been committed, then executive privilege doesn't cover that conversation. executive privilege doesn't apply to crimes committed by the government. And she's coming clean about how Bolton told her to approach National Security Council lawyers to leave a paper trail of at least Bolton trying to distance himself from whatever Sondland and Mulvaney were cooking up. Sondland, Volker and Rick Perry apparently referred to themselves as the three amigos of Ukraine policy because they were following Trump's orders to use Ukrainian policy to derive advantage for Trump, to manufacture a campaign advantage for Trump for the 2020 elections by extorting the Ukrainian president through promise of prestigious meetings with Donald Trump and $391 million of military aid that was on hold until the Ukrainian president was going to agree to make an announcement about investigating the company that employed Hunter Biden. So if that didn't make sense for people, I hope it's starting to make sense. That you have a State Department that enacts US foreign policy, and then you have Trump co-opting various corrupt officials in the State Department, adding his own personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to the mix, and have them working on a shadow State Department policy, namely pressure Ukrainians to investigate Hunter Biden, pressure the board of Naftogaz to change in favor of Trump-favored people who would be prepared to siphon off some of the profits of a Ukrainian national gas company towards Trump and his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani. So it's grift and perversion at all levels. Trump is also benefiting from paying off the person to whom he's in significant personal debt, Vladimir Putin. Trump is beholden to Putin, and Putin wanted the Turkish people or the Turkish military to invade northeastern Syria because as American troops have abandoned the field at Trump's instigation, American military bases are then left in Russian hands. ISIS fighters escape and the world becomes less safe for people in all Western countries because ISIS is a fanatical death cult that wants to kill Western people. Trump's helped make that happen. Turkey helped make that happen. Putin helped make that happen. So Erdogan, Putin and Trump are all allies working together to undermine America, to revolt, disappoint and dishearten American troops, and to depress and dishearten the American people that are non-cult members. All the while preparing Trump's cultish base, Republican voters, to attack non-Republican voters, to attack their fellow citizens, to be prepared to say, yes, we have weapons for a reason, and those weapons are to attack this coup against our rightful president, Donald Trump, and we will shoot people in the street. So it's important to be aware that that is what they're aiming for, whether they succeed or not, whether they ever literally would take their guns to the street if Donald Trump gave the word, I don't know. But that is why Donald Trump continually paints the impeachment investigation as invalid, because he is trying to rouse his followers to violence in the hope that moral and decent citizens in America will just surrender power to them out of a wish to not further invite violence from Trump's cultish, violent, aggressive base. So yes, Trump prepares them for violence by showing them a video of Trump in a church shooting all of his foes. He's addicting them to violence and enthusing them about the prospect of violence and desensitizing them to the idea of killing their foes in the media and Democrats and Democrat leaders such as President Obama. So it's not just that dreadful video, it's that dreadful push to launch violence against non-Republicans, against anybody who opposes Trump. And in doing so, maintain a grip on power by making everybody else afraid of further violence. It's a terrible, terrible plan, and it's a terrible unfolding of events, but we still put our trust in the rule of law and America's constitutional safeguards. But we should also still be prepared to take to the streets, because the more they see peaceful process, the more that undermines Trump's narrative that it's only terrible people. We should be sharing our professions, really, to normalize ourselves and make it less likely that Trump voters will try to kill us. People should be saying, I'm a dentist and I want America to be secure and I don't want Trump in power anymore. I want him impeached and removed. Yeah, I hope Democrats and Democratic supporters interview normal people and interview Republicans, because when we're stuck in a point of view, it can help us to see someone who we resonate with or who we identify with as part of a joint tribe expressing an opinion. So I know Republicans who support impeachment are a minority, but their numbers are incrementally growing and they should be interviewed and their opinions should be broadcast. Next time I come onto YouTube, I will read aloud from an important article written by a former Republican, David Weissman, and he elaborated on how he came to change his mind and came to undo all of his brainwashing that Democrats were traitors, the opposite of patriots, how all of the stuff he'd been led to believe was true about Democrats, that he had been brought to hate them and to ignore all the good that they did for the American people. So that will be my next thing I read aloud. I hope I'll let David know, and I hope he gives me his permission. I'm pretty sure he will. Thanks for listening. Take care, everyone. All the best. Bye.